Welcome to Mystery Cafe, your ultimate stop for gripping detective stories, chilling mysteries, and unforgettable investigations. Here, every video serves a fresh dose of suspense, shocking twists, and cases that challenge your inner detective. From classic whodunits to modern crime stories, we bring the world of mystery straight to your screen, where every clue matters and no secret stays buried for long. Before we start unraveling today's mystery, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa. Drop your country, city, or stay in the comments, and let's see how far the Mystery Cafe family reaches. Magnifying glass tilted right.
He shadow over St. Agnes. Chapter 1, The Parish Beneath the Fog. The small parish of St. Agnes on the cliff looked peaceful from afar, but as Father Brown walked up the cobbled path that October evening, he felt a heaviness in the air. A cold fog rolled from the sea, wrapping around the old stone church like a shroud. The building had stood for centuries, its walls dark with salt and age, its bell tower rising above the mist like a lonely sentinel. Father Brown had been sent by the bishop to assist Father Lemuel, a priest in poor health who had written of unholy disturbances within his church. Those words alone would not have moved Brown to travel across the country, but the letter had ended with something that stayed in his mind: I fear not ghosts, but guilt. As he entered the churchyard, he saw the figure of an old man tending to the graves. "Good evening," Brown said softly. The man straightened up, squinting through the mist. "Evening, Father. You must be the new priest." "I'm Thomas Hale, the sexton." Hale's voice trembled slightly, and when Brown asked about the disturbances, the man crossed himself. "It's not the dead troubling us, sir. It's the living. Things gone missing, candles lit at night when no one's inside, and that bell," he looked toward the tower. "It rings at midnight, Father. No hand on the rope, yet it rings." Father Brown looked up at the tower. "Perhaps a draft or loosened mechanism," he suggested calmly. Hale shook his head. "Maybe. But I've served here 40 years, and I tell you, it's not wind that makes a bell toll for the unburied." Inside, the church smelled of wax and damp stone. Statues of saints watched silently from the shadows. Father Lemuel was waiting near the altar, pale and thin as parchment. His eyes were weary but kind. "I'm grateful you came, Father Brown," he said. "I fear my strength is leaving me." Brown noticed the trembling in the old priest's hands and the dark circles under his eyes. "Tell me," he asked gently, "what troubles you most?" Lemuel hesitated, then whispered, "Something wicked hides beneath our holiness. A theft was committed here long ago, and the sin was buried, not confessed. I believe that sin has awakened." That night, the sea roared against the cliffs. Brown stayed up late in the vestry, sorting through parish records. Most were neat and ordinary: marriage certificates, donation lists, and old letters, but one ledger drew his attention. Some pages were torn, and several names had been scratched out. The ink stains looked recent. He took the ledger to the candlelight. A faint smell of smoke clung to the edges, as though it had been near fire. The last written line read, "Received from Lord Wyndham, £1,200 for church repairs." But the next page was missing. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the church, a soft ringing, like the brush of metal against metal. He looked up. The bell was tolling in the tower. Slowly. Measured. Midnight. Father Brown closed the ledger, rose, and made his way down the nave. The air grew colder with each step. Shadows stretched long over the pews. He opened the side door and stepped into the fog-filled courtyard, where the bell's deep note rolled out over the cliffs. The tower door stood slightly open. Brown entered. The stairway spiraled upward into darkness. As he climbed, his lantern flickered. Halfway up, he stopped. The rope that pulled the bell swayed as if an unseen hand still held it. He reached the belfry, and the movement ceased. The heavy bell hung motionless, silent now. He examined the mechanism. Everything was intact. Yet on the wooden floor lay a small silver cross, freshly polished, reflecting the light of his lantern. He bent to pick it up. It was cold, too cold for something left indoors. On the back was an engraving, F.L. Father Lemuel, Brown murmured. But why would his cross be here, beneath a silent bell that rang itself? As he turned to descend, a whisper echoed from below. It was faint but clear, carried through the stone stairwell like a sigh. Forgive. Father Brown stood still, lantern trembling in his hand. The sound came again, soft, human, and broken. Then silence. He descended quickly, clutching the cross. When he reached the vestry, he found Father Lemuel slumped over the altar rail, unconscious. His lips moved faintly, repeating one word. Forgive. Brown knelt beside him and whispered a prayer. But in his mind, a single thought burned: forgiveness was asked only by those who knew their sin. And in this parish, someone's sin had woken at last. Chapter 2, A Candle in the Wind. Morning light crept through the stained glass windows, scattering pale colors across the pews. Father Brown knelt in quiet prayer beside the altar where Father Lemuel rested, still unconscious but breathing softly. The parish doctor had come and gone, declaring it exhaustion. Yet Brown felt something else, something unseen pressing upon the church like the fog outside. He rose and walked to the sacristy. The small room smelled of wax and cold brass. He noticed a black smear near the altar rail where Lemuel had fallen. It looked like soot shaped roughly like a cross. Nearby, a rosary lay broken, beads scattered across the stone floor. The beads were black onyx, expensive, far beyond what the modest priest could afford. As he gathered them, the door creaked open. Miss Clara Marsh, the schoolteacher, entered with a vase of wildflowers. She was young, neatly dressed, and carried herself with calm discipline, yet her eyes darted around nervously. "Poor Father Lemuel," she said, arranging the flowers at the side of the altar. "He's worked himself to the bone. I told him the soul can break long before the body does." Brown smiled faintly. "Indeed, Miss Marsh. But sometimes a soul breaks not from labor but from silence." She looked away. "We all have our silences, Father. This village has learned to keep them." He studied her carefully. There was a trace of guilt behind her calm tone, a flicker that vanished when she met his gaze again. Later that day, Brown climbed the bell tower once more. He examined the rope mechanism under daylight. The fibers had been worn unevenly, as though handled often. Scratches lined the wooden floor near the crank, forming semicircles like drag marks. He knelt and brushed away dust until something metallic caught the light. A small silver key lay hidden in a groove between two planks. He turned it over in his hand. It was delicately made, not for a door but perhaps a box or drawer. He slipped it into his pocket. From the height of the tower, the cliffs of St. Agnes stretched into the gray horizon. Below, the sea crashed violently. Amid that wild beauty, the village looked peaceful, too peaceful, as though pretending nothing had changed. When Brown descended, he found Hale polishing brass candlesticks. "You've been here long, haven't you?" he asked. "Since my father's time," Hale replied. "Seen more funerals than weddings, more secrets than confessions." He hesitated. "Father Lemuel, he was a good man. But some burdens can rot even holiness." "What burdens?" Brown asked gently. Hale lowered his voice. "Years ago, money went missing from the church fund. Lord Wyndham had donated a great sum for the roof repairs, but the accounts never matched. People whispered. Lemuel took the blame and repaid part of it himself. Said nothing after. Only worked harder. Maybe that's what broke him." That evening, the fog rolled back in from the sea. The church lanterns glowed faintly like trapped stars. Brown brewed tea in the rectory and pondered the small key. He felt sure it unlocked something meant to stay hidden. He decided to search the vestry again. As he entered, a faint flicker caught his eye. A candle burned near the confessional, one he hadn't lit. Its flame bent and trembled though the air was still. He moved closer, footsteps quiet on the stone floor. Then he saw a shadow cross the wall, tall, swift, human. It passed behind the altar rail and vanished into the sacristy. "Who's there?" Brown called softly. No answer came, only the rustle of fabric. He hurried forward. The sacristy door stood half open. Inside, moonlight streamed through the window. The desk where he had left the ledger last night was empty. The book was gone. Brown's eyes fell upon the window latch. It had been broken cleanly from the inside. Whoever took the ledger hadn't forced entry, they had waited within. He turned as a gust of cold wind extinguished the candle flame. Darkness swallowed the room. In that darkness, he heard again a whisper, almost like breath, "Forgive me." When he struck a match, the room was empty once more. Only a faint scent of burnt wax remained. Brown stood motionless, the match flickering in his fingers. The missing ledger, the silver key, the shadow in the sacristy, all were pieces of a pattern that began long ago. He replaced the candle and whispered, "A sin unspoken grows louder than a sermon." Outside, the wind howled against the church walls. Somewhere in the distance, the midnight bell groaned once before falling silent again. Father Brown crossed himself and looked toward the altar. "Something," he murmured, "is trying to speak." Chapter 3, Secrets of the Ledger. The next morning brought a grim calm over St. Agnes. The sea had quieted, the fog thinned, yet the church felt heavier than ever. Father Brown ate a simple breakfast, then went to see Inspector Ridge, who had arrived from the nearby town of Penlee after hearing of the disturbance. Ridge was tall, square-shouldered, and confident in a way that comes from solving ordinary crimes, not moral ones. "I hear a book's gone missing," Ridge said, glancing around the sacristy with suspicion. "And a priest fainting beside the altar. Sounds more like thievery than theology to me." "Perhaps both," Father Brown replied mildly. "You see, theft of money is an act. Theft of conscience is a tragedy." Ridge frowned. "I prefer plain crimes, Father." "Who had access to the church?" "Almost everyone in the village," Brown said. "But not everyone had reason to steal from God." They examined the broken latch. Ridge ran his finger along the edge. "Forced from inside," he muttered. "So someone hid here before the doors were locked." He crouched, noticing a faint print in the dust, a woman's shoe, narrow and fine. Outside, the village square was quiet except for children playing near the schoolhouse. Father Brown crossed the road to find Miss Clara Marsh. She was teaching, her calm restored, her voice clear and measured. When she saw him, her face tightened. "You've come about Father Lemuel again," she said before he could speak. "He's still resting. I'll visit him this evening." "I came about the ledger," Brown said gently. "It was taken from the sacristy last night." She froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled too quickly. "Perhaps the wind carried it away." "The wind does not break locks or hide in shadows," he said softly. "But people sometimes do." Clara's gaze flickered downward. "You suspect me?" "I suspect pain," Brown replied. "And pain often seeks to cover itself with action." She turned away, her knuckles white against the desk. "Some wounds are not yours to heal, Father." Brown left her to her lesson, but his heart grew heavier. Every lie he heard from her sounded more like a plea. That afternoon, he met Thomas Hale polishing the brass lanterns. The old sexton looked weary but willing to talk. "Inspector's been asking questions," Hale said. "Said he might search everyone's home. Won't find much in mine but dust and regret." "Hale," Brown asked, "did anything else go missing besides the ledger?" The man hesitated. "Years ago, a golden chalice vanished from the vestry. Turned up again a week later, quiet as you please. Father Lemuel told us to forget it, said some poor soul had returned it in shame. Maybe the same one's at work now." Brown looked at the altar. "Or maybe the same one never stopped." When evening fell, Brown returned to his small quarters behind the rectory. He placed the silver key on his desk and studied it again. The teeth were worn, suggesting frequent use. He tested it on the drawers in his room, no fit. He walked back to the church and tried it on several cupboards. Finally, near the altar, behind an old tapestry of St. Michael, he found a small wooden door set into the wall. It was almost invisible unless one knew to look. The key slid in perfectly. A faint click echoed. Brown opened the door to reveal a tiny recess, dusty but intact. Inside lay an envelope sealed with wax and marked with Father Lemuel's neat handwriting. Beneath it sat a stack of aged donation receipts, yellowed and brittle. The top one bore a familiar name, Clara Marsh. Brown read the letter by candlelight. To the next servant of Saint Agnes. If my strength fails before I am freed of this burden, let truth be your guide. Years ago, money entrusted to this parish was lost through deceit, and I bore the blame. I did so to protect one who confessed and repented, a young woman driven by desperation, not malice. I believed I could save her soul through silence. Yet silence has grown heavier than sin itself. If this reaches your hands, know that forgiveness is a door, but it must be opened on both sides. Father Brown folded the letter, eyes closed in sorrow. Lemuel's mercy had been noble but misplaced. The wound he tried to hide had festered in darkness until it poisoned everyone near it. Suddenly, the door to the vestry creaked open. Inspector Ridge entered, lantern in hand. "Still digging through secrets, are you, Father?" "I've found more than secrets," Brown said quietly. "I've found confession, written, but never heard." Ridge eyed the envelope. "That'll help us in court, not confession." "Perhaps," Brown replied. "But sin confessed to God weighs differently than crime confessed to men." The inspector left, unimpressed, leaving the door swinging behind him. Brown turned back to the small cupboard and replaced the items carefully. He lingered over the silver key before slipping it into his cassock again. The church was silent now. Only the sea's low murmur reached its walls. Then, from somewhere deep within the building, came a faint sound, soft, deliberate, metallic. The bell rope moved again, swaying without wind. Father Brown watched from below as the bell gave a single slow toll. He did not run this time. He merely whispered, "Even the dead grow restless when truth is near." The candle beside him flickered violently, as if answering. He crossed himself and said, "Tomorrow, we open every door." Chapter 4, The Letter of Confession. The morning light at St. Agnes felt different that day, softer, as though the sun itself was cautious to touch the stones of the church. Father Brown sat at a small wooden desk in the vestry, the letter from Father Lemuel lying open before him. The ink had faded in places, but the words burned bright in meaning. A priest's mercy had been stretched beyond reason, and his silence had fed a sin that should have been spoken years ago. Brown read the letter again, slowly, each sentence heavy with sorrow. Lemuel had written of a young woman, desperate and frightened, who had confessed her role in taking part of Lord Wyndham's donation. The theft had not been for greed but to pay a family debt. Lemuel had forgiven her, swearing to keep her name hidden. But his conscience had not rested. "I believed I could save her," he had written, "but secrets wrought even the purest grace." Brown folded the letter carefully and looked toward the crucifix on the wall. "Mercy is a door," he murmured, "but even doors need light to open." He slipped the letter into his pocket and left the vestry. Outside, the air smelled of salt and rain. He crossed the graveyard path toward the rectory, where Inspector Ridge was waiting, impatient as ever. "You found something," Ridge said sharply. "I've found truth," Brown replied. "But not the kind that courts can weigh." Ridge scowled. "Truth that can't hang a man is little use to me. I want the thief." "The thief," said Brown softly, "was forgiven long ago. Yet forgiveness without confession breeds new crimes. Someone wants to bury the past before it rises again." Ridge grunted. "Then let's see who's holding the shovel." That afternoon, Brown visited Father Lemuel in his small room behind the altar. The old priest's face was pale, eyes half open, whispering prayers even in sleep. Brown sat beside him and said quietly, "Your mercy was noble, my friend. But mercy without justice can wound the soul it tries to heal." At dusk, Miss Clara arrived carrying a small basket of bread. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the table. "How is he?" she asked. "He wakes and sleeps in turns," Brown answered. "His heart is heavy. He wrote a letter, Miss Marsh. A letter of confession." Her face drained of color. "A letter?" she repeated. "Yes," Brown said. "He spoke of a woman he forgave long ago. A woman who took something that did not belong to her but repented. I found the letter behind the altar." Clara's voice fell to a whisper. "Then he told you everything." "I know what mercy cost him," Brown said. "But I don't yet know what it cost you." She turned away, clutching her gloves. "I was young," she said at last. "My father was dying. We owed money to Lord Wyndham's steward. He threatened to have us thrown out. I borrowed from the church fund thinking I could repay it before anyone noticed. But the fire came that week, and the records burned. Father Lemuel knew. He said nothing. He paid it back himself." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "He ruined his health for my sake. I wanted to confess, but then people began whispering about the stolen chalice. If I spoke, it would have destroyed him. So I stayed silent." Brown's eyes softened. Silence is not peace, Miss Marsh. It's only quiet guilt. Before she could reply, a loud crash echoed from outside, the heavy toll of the church bell, breaking off midway through a swing. Both turned toward the sound. Brown hurried to the tower, Clara close behind. The rope lay cut clean through. The air smelled faintly of smoke, and candle wax pooled on the floor. The flame had melted into a strange shape, curling like a serpent. Brown bent down and touched the wax. It was warm. Whoever had been here had just fled. Clara clutched his sleeve. "Father, what does it mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "that someone else carries guilt here, someone who fears exposure more than sin." He found a footprint near the stairs, sharp and defined, the sole of a fine leather shoe, not worn by any villager. This was no ghost, Brown said. It was someone from outside. Someone with reason to silence Father Lemuel. He stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the sea crash below the cliffs. "The dead do not fear discovery," he murmured. "But the living often do." That night, Brown returned to the vestry and placed Lemuel's letter back in its hiding place. He looked once more at the flickering candlelight on the wall and said softly, "The past has found its voice again. And this time, it will not whisper, it will ring." He stepped out into the fog, the church bell silent above him. The sea wind brushed his face like a warning. Somewhere, beyond the mist, another secret waited to be unmasked. Tomorrow, he decided, he would visit Lord Wyndham's heir, the man whose name had lingered in Lemuel's notes like a shadow. The ledger might be gone, but the truth had only begun to speak. And as the fog swallowed the village once more, Father Brown whispered, "The devil's best disguise is always silence." Chapter 5, The Broken Bell. The morning after the bell's strange fall, a chill swept through St. Agnes. Mist drifted low over the cliffs, curling around the churchyard like smoke from a dying fire. The villagers gathered in uneasy clusters, whispering that the bell had cursed the tower. Father Brown ignored the talk and examined the wreckage. The thick rope lay severed halfway up the stair, the fibers sliced cleanly. On the wooden platform beneath the bell, candle wax had hardened into a twisted shape, half cross and half serpent. To one side, footprints marked the dust, narrow soles, polished leather, the kind of shoes worn by men of wealth. Inspector Ridge arrived soon after, puffing from the climb. "Well," he said, "it wasn't wind or witchcraft. Someone cut that rope. And not our local peasants, they couldn't afford boots like these." Father Brown nodded. "You're right. It was a man of taste, and of guilt." The inspector frowned. "You think this connects to the missing ledger?" "I think everything here connects to conscience," Brown said quietly. Later that afternoon, the church received an unexpected visitor. A tall gentleman in a gray overcoat entered, carrying himself with the calm arrogance of privilege. "Good day," he said to the inspector. "I am Julian Wyndham, heir to the late Lord Wyndham. I came upon hearing there's been trouble in my uncle's parish." Father Brown's eyes narrowed slightly. "Welcome, Mr. Wyndham. The parish remembers your uncle's kindness. His name appears often in our records." Julian smiled thinly. "Ah, the donations. Yes, my uncle was rather sentimental about this old church. I only wish his generosity hadn't been misplaced." Inspector Ridge raised an eyebrow. "Misplaced?" Julian shrugged. "Let us say some of the funds he gave were poorly accounted for. I've been reviewing his estate's records. There are discrepancies in the church's ledgers, quite serious ones. Father Brown's expression remained gentle, though his mind sharpened like a blade. "Curious," he said. "The same ledger vanished 2 nights ago." Julian's eyes flickered, but he kept his composure. "Vanished? How careless. Then perhaps it's best not to stir the matter. The past rarely serves the living." "On the contrary," Brown replied softly. "The past feeds the present, whether we bless it or bury it." That evening, Brown returned alone to the quiet nave. The fog pressed against the stained glass like gray water. He lit a single candle near the altar and sat, thinking. Julian Wyndham's visit had not been one of sympathy, it had been reconnaissance. The heir wanted the ledger hidden, or destroyed, before it could stain his name. He walked toward the sacristy, candle in hand. A faint draught brushed his cassock, though every window was closed. He opened the cupboard where Lemuel's letter had been stored. It was untouched. But on the table beside it, a folded piece of paper lay pinned under a small stone. Brown unfolded it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp and deliberate. "Stop searching. The church belongs to its faithful, not to the dead. Let sleeping sins lie, or more than bells will fall." Brown read the note twice, then slipped it into his pocket. "Threats," he murmured, "are the prayers of frightened men." When he left the church, a shadow moved near the trees by the gate. The shape was tall and slender. It lingered for a heartbeat, then vanished into the fog. Brown did not follow. He knew the fog always revealed in its own time. The next morning, he met Inspector Ridge at the inn where Julian Wyndham was staying. The inspector looked tired and irritated. "Our noble visitor doesn't like questions," Ridge said. "Claims we're wasting his time." Brown smiled slightly. "Then perhaps his time is what we should examine." Julian greeted them stiffly. "You're persistent, Father. I admire that in clergymen, up to a point." "Persistence," Brown said, "is often the language of truth." He placed the silver key on the table. "Does this look familiar, Mr. Wyndham?" Julian's calm broke for just an instant, a twitch, a flicker of recognition. "A key? Hardly proof of anything." "It opened a cupboard containing a letter from Father Lemuel," Brown said. "A letter about a debt repaid, a theft forgiven, and a donor whose generosity became his curse." Julian's tone cooled. "Are you suggesting I had anything to do with this village melodrama?" "I'm suggesting," said Brown gently, "that someone forged entries in the ledger to claim money that was never owed." Julian rose abruptly. "I've had enough. Good evening, gentlemen." When he left, Ridge muttered, "We can't touch him without evidence." "There's evidence," Brown replied softly. "It's just waiting for light." That night, he kept watch inside the church. The air was thick with silence. Hours passed. Then, near midnight, he heard the faint click of a lock. The sacristy door creaked. A lantern's glow moved inside. Brown waited until the figure approached the confessional. "Good evening, Mr. Wyndham," he said quietly. Julian froze, the lantern trembling in his hand. "You shouldn't be here, Father." "And yet," Brown said, stepping closer, "neither should you." Julian's face twisted with anger. "That ledger contains lies. My uncle was senile, he left his fortune to fools." Brown's voice was calm, almost tender. "No. He left it to the only place that forgave him. You're trying to erase the one record of his grace." Julian clenched his fists. You don't understand family honor. I understand sin, Brown replied. And I understand that honor without honesty is only another form of pride. Julian turned to leave, but Ridge stepped out from behind a pew, revolver drawn. You're not going anywhere, sir. For the first time, Julian's confidence faltered. You have no proof. Brown lifted the silver key again, letting it catch the candlelight. This opened more than a cupboard, Mr. Wyndham. It opened your uncle's truth, and yours. Chapter 6, The Midnight Trial. The Church of St. Agnes stood silent under a bruised sky. Inside, the air was heavy with candle smoke and the damp scent of old stone. The moon's pale glow spilled through the tall windows, cutting thin paths of light across the floor. Father Brown, Inspector Ridge, and Julian Wyndham stood like actors caught between justice and sin. Ridge kept his revolver steady, though his voice was low. You'll answer our questions, Mr. Wyndham. Quietly. Julian sneered. I've done nothing you can prove. That key proves nothing. That priest's rambling letter proves nothing. You can't charge me on the words of a dying man. Father Brown's tone remained calm. I have no wish to charge you, my son. But God already has. Julian's jaw tightened. You think this is about faith? It's about property. My uncle was deceived by sentimental men who wanted his money for their crumbling chapel. I was correcting a wrong. By forging his signature? Ridge asked sharply. By breaking into the church? Julian hesitated, then spat. The money was mine by right. He promised it to me before his illness. That priest tricked him into giving it away. Father Brown stepped forward. You mean Father Lemuel, who paid for the roof repairs with his own savings when your uncle's funds went missing? Julian's eyes darted toward the floor. His silence was admission enough. The candles flickered as a gust of wind swept through the nave. The great bell above gave a hollow moan, as if echoing the moment's gravity. Ridge nodded toward Brown. Go on, Father. You see deeper into souls than I do. Brown's eyes were gentle, but his words cut with truth. You came here to erase your uncle's last act of goodness. You forged new entries in the ledger to make it seem as though he'd been robbed. But the missing pages revealed your handwriting. You feared exposure, so you stole the ledger, thinking no one would ever find it again. But guilt doesn't rest quietly. Mr. Wyndham. It tolls, like a bell that refuses to stay silent. Julian's face flushed with anger. You know nothing of guilt. You've never had to fight for what's yours. Father Brown's voice softened. You mistake inheritance for justice. You fight ghosts because you cannot forgive a man for being kinder than you. Julian trembled. He was weak. No, Brown said simply. He was redeemed. There was a pause. The wind outside rose, whistling through the tower vents. Ridge lowered his revolver slightly but did not step away. We found the ledger in your carriage, Mr. Wyndham, he said. You hid it under a false floorboard. Julian's composure cracked. You searched my carriage? I had a warrant, Ridge replied coolly. And your handwriting matches the forged entries exactly. Julian looked from one man to the other, his arrogance draining into desperation. I only took back what was mine. The church stole from me first. They took my uncle's estate with their sermons and promises of heaven. Father Brown's eyes were sorrowful. You took peace from your own heart, and you'll never buy it back with gold. That's the only real theft here. For a long moment, Julian stood motionless. Then his shoulders sagged. He looked around the dim church, the flickering candles, the worn pews, the silent crucifix. "Do you think God will forgive me?" he asked quietly. Brown stepped closer. "He already wants to. The question is whether you can forgive yourself." Julian closed his eyes. "Then let it end." He held out his hands to Ridge, who placed him under arrest. The inspector's face showed little triumph. "You priests get confessions," he muttered. "I get paperwork." Brown smiled faintly. "Both are forms of penance, Inspector." They escorted Julian outside. The fog had thinned, revealing the cliffs gleaming pale beneath the moon. As Ridge led him toward the carriage, Julian glanced once at the sea. "My uncle used to stand here and say the waves sounded like prayer," he murmured. "I never understood him until now." Father Brown touched his arm. "Perhaps now you will." Back inside, the church seemed to breathe again. Brown replaced the silver key on the altar beside a small wooden crucifix. He whispered a prayer for Father Lemuel and for Julian both. In his heart, he felt the quiet weight of justice tempered by mercy, the kind of justice that could not be written in court records. When Ridge returned, he found Brown still praying. "He's gone," the inspector said. "We'll take him to Penley for questioning. He won't resist." Brown opened his eyes slowly. He already surrendered where it mattered. Ridge frowned. "You mean to God?" "To truth," Brown said softly. "That's usually the same thing." The inspector nodded toward the window. "Funny, the fog's lifting." "It always does," Brown replied. "But only after something hidden has been found." Outside, the first pale hints of dawn broke through the mist. The waves shimmered like silver glass. The bell tower above them stood still, silent but whole again, as though absolved by the night's confessions. Father Brown extinguished the last candle and whispered, "Light always comes after the toll." He looked once more toward the cliffs, then turned away. The storm had passed, but somewhere, he knew, another shadow was already gathering. Chapter 7, The Light Through the Fog. Dawn broke over St. Agnes with a soft, golden light that seemed almost cautious as it touched the church roof. For the first time in weeks, the sea was calm, and the fog drifted away like a retreating spirit. The great bell, which had tolled so strangely in the nights before, now hung silent and still, gleaming faintly in the sun. Father Brown walked along the narrow path between the graves, his cassock brushing against the dew-damp grass. Birds were singing again, a sound that had been missing during the long days of fear. The village was returning to life. Inside the rectory, Inspector Ridge was finishing a report at the table, his handwriting brisk and efficient. "You know," he said, without looking up, "this would have been simpler if you'd just handed me evidence instead of sermons." Brown smiled faintly. "But sermons often lead where evidence cannot. A man's heart is a greater witness than his hand." Ridge grunted, capping his pen. "The younger Wyndham confessed in the carriage last night. Admitted he forged the records, took part of the inheritance, and tried to burn the rest. He says he never meant for the priest to get hurt." Brown nodded quietly. "Guilt never means to harm, it only wishes to hide. The harm comes when hiding fails." The inspector stood, stretching his stiff shoulders. "You're a strange man, Father. You spend more time forgiving crooks than condemning them." "Condemnation closes doors," said Brown softly. "Forgiveness opens them. I've always preferred light to locks." Later that morning, Brown visited Father Lemuel, who had regained consciousness. The old priest sat propped against pillows, his eyes brighter but still weak. He smiled faintly as Brown entered. "I heard the bell this morning," Lemuel whispered. "It sounded clean again." Brown placed a hand on his shoulder. "The storm has passed, Father. The truth was found, and your silence is lifted." Lemuel sighed deeply. "I only wanted to protect her, Clara. She was young, frightened. I thought mercy would save her soul." "It did," Brown said. "But it almost lost yours. Mercy without truth can turn into chains." Lemuel's eyes glistened. "You've done what I could not." "No," said Brown gently. "I only finished the prayer you began." Outside, Miss Clara Marsh stood near the church steps, her hands clasped tightly around a folded letter. When she saw Father Brown, she walked to him hesitantly. "I've written my resignation," she said. "I'm leaving the school. I'll go to Bristol, perhaps. They say the sisters there take teachers for their charity schools." Brown took the letter from her hand. "Running away doesn't erase the past," he said kindly. "I'm not running," she replied. "I'm beginning again. I can't undo what I did, but I can live differently." Brown studied her face, the weariness, the faint hope, and nodded. "Then that is repentance, not escape. God bless you for it." She bit her lip. "Will they hate me here, Father? When they find out?" "Perhaps for a while," Brown said. "But truth always outlives gossip. And forgiveness grows faster than fear when given the light." She smiled through tears. "Father Lemuel asked me to tell you something. He said you reminded him of Saint Francis, gentle with sinners, stern with pride." Brown chuckled. "I'm not half as holy as that. But I try to keep my hat dry, at least." Clara laughed softly for the first time in days, then turned to leave. Brown watched her walk toward the hill road, sunlight spilling over her shoulders. The village bell tolled once, a slow, steady sound that echoed like blessing. By evening, Inspector Ridge joined Brown for tea in the rectory garden. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of lavender. The inspector poured himself a cup, muttering, "I've been thinking. You priests see crime as sickness. I see it as choice." "Perhaps both," Brown said, stirring his tea. "A choice made by a soul already sick. Some men catch the fever of greed, others of pride. The cure is rarely punishment, it's truth." Ridge looked toward the sea, now calm and gold beneath the sunset. "You know, I'll miss this place. I've never seen fog lift so completely." Brown smiled. "Fog always lifts when hearts clear first." As the sun dipped below the horizon, he stood and looked at the church tower. The bell reflected the last flame of daylight, bright and still. "Do you hear it?" he asked quietly. Ridge frowned. "Hear what?" "The silence," said Brown. "It's honest now. It used to lie." The inspector gave him a puzzled look, but Brown only smiled. When a bell rings falsely, it's because something inside it's cracked. So it is with men. Now it rings true again, because confession has mended the crack. The evening closed gently around them. Lamps flickered to life in cottage windows. A choir of gulls passed overhead, crying softly against the fading light. Father Brown walked alone to the cliff edge. The wind was cool, carrying the faint echo of the sea. He folded his hands and whispered a short prayer, not for the guilty, nor the innocent, but for all who lived between the two. The world, he murmured, is full of shadows, but even shadows prove there is light. He turned back toward the quiet church, its cross gleaming faintly against the stars. For the first time since his arrival, Saint Agnes slept without fear. Chapter 8, The Grace of Saint Agnes. The morning sky over Saint Agnes was pale blue, washed clean by the sea breeze. Waves broke softly against the cliffs, and the gulls wheeled high above the steeple. For the first time in months, the church bells rang with a pure, steady sound, calling the villagers to prayer. Father Brown stood by the doorway, watching them come in one by one, farmers, fishermen, mothers with children, all wearing the same shy expression of relief. The storm, both of weather and conscience, had passed. Inside, sunlight streamed through the colored glass, painting the stone floor in patterns of crimson and gold. The smell of wax and lilies filled the air. Brown spoke gently from the pulpit, his voice calm but firm. "Forgiveness," he said, "is not a gift we earn. It is a grace we allow to enter. When truth is spoken, mercy finds room to live." When the Mass ended, the people lingered. They no longer whispered about ghosts or curses. They smiled, shook hands, and spoke softly of planting, of fishing, of the coming spring. The shadow that had hung over Saint Agnes had lifted, leaving behind a strange peace, fragile, but real. After the service, Brown walked to the small garden behind the rectory. Father Lemuel sat in a chair near the wall, a blanket over his knees. His face was thin but peaceful. He smiled when Brown approached. "You've done more for this parish than I did in 20 years, Lemuel said. Brown shook his head. "I only uncovered what was already there, truth waiting to breathe again." Lemuel looked toward the sea. "Do you think God forgets our sins once we confess them?" Brown thought for a moment. "No. I think he remembers them as healed wounds, not open ones." The old priest's eyes softened. "Then I can rest." Brown placed a hand on his shoulder. "Rest, but live too. You've earned that much." By afternoon, Brown received a letter from Inspector Ridge. The constable brought it by hand. Ridge had returned to Penley to close the case but wrote in his brisk, untidy style. "Wyndham has confessed in full. He'll serve a sentence, but the magistrate says your words in court turned punishment into repentance. You've a strange talent for making criminals cry, Father. I'll not say I understand it, but I'm grateful all the same." Brown smiled as he folded the letter. "He'll understand someday," he murmured. Later that evening, he visited the belfry one last time. The repaired rope hung straight, the brass gleaming. He placed his hand upon the bell and whispered a blessing. "You've seen too much darkness," he said softly. "Now ring only for peace." When he descended, he found Miss Clara Marsh waiting by the gate. She wore a modest traveling cloak and carried a small case. Her eyes were clearer than before, free from the fear that once lived in them. "I wanted to thank you, Father," she said. "The sisters in Bristol have ridden back. They'll take me in. I'll teach again, under a new name." Brown nodded. "A new name is only worth having if you remember the old one with honesty." "I will," she promised. "And I'll pray for Father Lemuel every day." "He'll feel it," said Brown. "Prayer travels farther than trains." She smiled and extended her hand. "Goodbye, Father." "Goodbye, Miss Marsh," he replied gently. "Go in peace, and let your silence stay broken." He watched her walk away, the road winding up through the cliffs until she disappeared into the golden haze of afternoon. The sea wind lifted his hat slightly, and he pressed it down with a chuckle. "Another soul escaped the fog," he said. That night, the village gathered once more, this time not in fear but in gratitude. Candles glowed in every window, and the churchyard shimmered with tiny flames flickering against the dark. The people sang hymns softly, their voices rising like the tide. Father Brown stood at the back of the church, unseen, listening. The song carried through the open doors, echoing into the night, "Lead kindly light," amid the encircling gloom. He closed his eyes. It reminded him of every mystery he had ever solved, not the cleverness of deduction, but the slow revelation of grace. Evil, he thought, was loud and dramatic, but good was quiet, patient, persistent. It stayed after the noise was gone. When the last hymn ended, he walked to the cliff's edge. The stars were bright over the black sea. He took from his pocket the small silver key, the one that had unlocked so many secrets. He held it up to the starlight for a moment, then tossed it gently into the waves. "Let the past rest," he whispered. "Its lock has been opened." The wind caught his words and carried them away. The church bell rang once more, steady, clear, and whole. Its sound rolled across the cliffs like a final blessing. Father Brown turned back toward the village, his small figure moving through the dim light, content, thoughtful, and at peace. Tomorrow he would leave Street Agnes and go wherever conscience called next. There would be other crimes, other lost souls, other truths to bring to light. But tonight, Saint Agnes slept in grace. And above it all, under the endless sky, the bell of forgiveness rang on.